Part 50. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 493. When Mu Yangling woke up again, it was already dark outside. She blinked her eyes to get used to the darkness. She turned her head to look to the side, and saw the child beside the pillow by the moonlight. Mu Yangling's heart softened, and he stretched out his hand to touch his forehead. The child was sleeping soundly. He probably felt disturbed, so his nose moved twice, his small brows frowned, and then his mouth opened slightly. He moved his body twice, tilted his head and continued to sleep. Li Chun, who was on duty outside, came in with a light when he heard the movement. "Fourth Grandma, are you awake?" Mu Yangling gave a hum and said, "I'm hungry, go get some food." Li Chun let the little girl guard, put on a piece of clothes, went to the small kitchen and asked the cook to give it to Mu Yangling. He used chicken soup, put a handful of vegetables, and laid 2 eggs, and Li Chun carefully handed the noodles to Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling carefully moved her son to the bed. After eating, she felt better in her stomach. Instead of asking about this morning's case, she asked, "Did the third young master drink milk today?" "No, Granny Wen only fed 2 sips of water, and the third young master fell asleep with a few murmurs. She still hasn't woken up yet. The nanny said that she can nurse the baby when she wakes up." Mu Yangling breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "Let the nanny wait first, don't feed him, you go and ask the kitchen to make me some milk, I will feed the baby myself." Li Chun's eyes widened, and he called out in a low voice, "Fourth Grandma, how can you breastfeed yourself? Here, only poor and humble people who can't afford a nanny will breastfeed themselves." "Do as I say," Mu Yangling interrupted her forcefully, and said, "I must give milk tomorrow morning." She felt her chest swell, and she felt that breastfeeding was not a problem at all. Before, she was not against asking for a wet nurse, and thought that as long as she gave her colostrum to the baby, she would be able to spend more time doing other things without feeding the baby, but now she suddenly changed her mind when she saw the baby. She's going to feed him herself because it's her baby. Li Chun knew that he couldn't persuade him anymore, so he could only accept it. Mu Yangling slept for a long time, but now he didn't feel sleepy anymore, so he looked at the child, leaned on the pillow and asked, "Is the news about fourth master true?" Li Chun lowered his head, nodded after a while, and hurriedly explained, "Fourth Grandma, don't worry, my cousin said, those bandits can't do anything to fourth master, not to mention, there are not as many people around fourth master as the old lady said, that's what she did to scare you." Mu Yangling looked at her and asked, "How long has it been?" Li Chun's mouth moved, but he still said, "It's been 16 days. Mu Yangling sighed, "Is the emperor planning to save him?" "No," Li Chun hurriedly said, "I heard that the emperor is inclined to recruit, but the opinions of the court have not been unified, and there is no conclusion until now. Don't worry, Mrs. Biao's opinions have been spread in many places, and it won't take long. After a long time, the imperial court will send troops to help the fourth master out of the siege. What's more, isn't the uncle still there? The emperor doesn't care about the fourth master, he has to consider his feelings." These words were obviously taught by someone else, but the other party who persuaded Li Chun couldn't convince her. How could it be possible to be alright after being besieged for 16 days? Even if Chi Heiran can hold on, what about food and drink? Mu Yangling's eyes were slightly wet. She turned her head to look at the child on the side of the bed, touched his little face, and said in a low voice, "Your father will be safe, right? The son is still sleeping sweetly." Li Chun only felt his nose sore, and turned his head to wipe away his tears. "What about Guyu, why are you the only one in the room?" "Guyu hurt her waist, and she is resting in the room now, the other girls in the room," Li Chun said after a pause, "they were all arrested by the grandma, and they said that they need to investigate carefully. Guyu was crushed to the waist when she collapsed with the old woman in her arms, and Li Xia and Li Qiu were locked up again. If the three of them don't show up tomorrow, the fourth grandma will still be suspicious and ask, why not tell the fourth grandma from the beginning? Has the lady recruited? Li Chun shivered, thinking of grandma's instructions. She said carefully, fourth grandma, I told you, don't be angry, that woman ran over to her death while the servants weren't paying attention. There was no unnecessary expression on Mu Yangling's face, he just nodded slightly, and waved Li Chun to go down. If you find out the matter, please come and tell me. Li Chun breathed a sigh of relief and stepped back. Mu Yangling got up the next day and ate the breast milk stewed by the cook. When the child woke up and began to cry, the nurse helped Mu Yangling rub the breasts with a hot towel. It hurts, some swelling, some rubbing raw, but the nanny took away the hot towel and said, fourth grandma, it's all right, let the third young master try it quickly and see if you can eat it. Mu Yangling hurriedly picked up the child and stuffed it carefully into his mouth. The child, who was crying miserably like a kitten, immediately sucked it up eagerly. Mu Yangling's eyes lit up, and he shouted, he has eaten it. My son is so smart, he can breastfeed for the first time. The nanny couldn't bear to look straight at her, she rolled her eyes, this is instinct, okay, which child can't breastfeed? But at this time, the mother couldn't be messed with, and the nanny and Li Chun followed Mu Yangling's words and praised the young master. When the little thing was full, Mu Yangling's previous worries suddenly dissipated. She asked with a smile, I heard that if the mother is in a good mood, the breast milk will be good, and the child will be healthier, isn't it? The nanny was taken aback, she had never heard such words. Li Chun saw her in a daze, so she pinched her quietly. The nanny immediately said, yes, there is such a saying. Fourth grandma, then you have to be happy every day, so that our third young master will be as strong as fourth master in the future. Li Chun laughed. Mu Yangling nodded with a smile, thought for a while and said, it's a happy event for me to have a baby. I have to tell fourth master about it. Go and get your pen and ink. I want to write him a letter. Li Chun really wanted to say that even if it was sent out, fourth master might not receive it, but seeing Mu Yangling's calm expression, he didn't say that, and went out to bring the things in for her. Mu Yangling picked up the pen and thought about it before starting to write. Finally, she carefully grabbed her son's little paw and printed a little ink on it carefully. After the ink is dry, hand it over to Li Chun, take the letter to Mr. Biao, and finally ask him to find a woman who knows how to fight. If it can't be delivered to the fourth master, I will send it in front of everyone at the foot of the mountain. Read it to him. Li Chun opened his mouth wide. Fourth grandma, how dangerous is this? Mu Yangling carefully wiped his son's hands with a hot towel, and said while wiping, don't worry, Mr. Biao won't do anything if you can't do it. Li Chun felt that Mu Yangling's move was too crazy, so he went directly to the bandit's den to deliver a letter to the fourth master on the mountain, knowing that he would never return. But who knew that Biao Gongzi was silent for a while after receiving the letter, but he actually responded. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 494. With loose hair and unshaven beard, Chi Heiran licked his peeling lips and asked, how long can our food and water last? Lieutenant Zhong's face was full of bitterness, and he said in a low voice, that's enough for tomorrow. And it must be under the condition that he can only eat 3 points full. Chi Heiran is indeed a rare general. With 3,000 people against more than 36,000 people, he can survive for 18 days. He doesn't know if General Yuan can do it, but he has been with him for 8 years. A general who has been in the world for 10 years obviously cannot do it, and Chi Heiran has not yet reached the championship. In the end, they didn't die from losing the enemy, but from lack of food and grass, and lack of rescue. Deputy General Zhong has been full of expectations from the beginning to now disheartened. Difficult to level. This is still the case for Deputy General Zhong, let alone the soldiers below. Several younger ones hugged their knees and cried in a low voice, asking their companions, is the imperial court abandoning us? The old fritters who have been in the army for a long time have a livid face. If they used to be, they would definitely yell at them, but now they can't do it. It affects the morale of the army, and their last chance of survival is gone. Chi-Heiran walked all the way, his face became more and more serious. If he gave up these people, it would not be difficult to get away with his kung fu, but if he gave up on them, would he still do it? Chi-Heiran thought of Mu Yangling, who was pregnant with Liujia, and felt pain and soreness in his heart for a moment. He clenched his fists tightly, turned around and looked at Lieutenant Zhone with red eyes for a while, until his hairs stood on end. Chi-Heiran said in a low voice, "Ask someone to guard Adjutant Lin and the others, and find the trustworthy President Yang Jian." A dark light flashed in Zhone's eyes. He hesitated for a moment, and then retreated. Chi-Heiran returned to the tent, and Fei Bai said anxiously, "Master, what are you going to do? We haven't grasped Vice General Zhone yet, so I'm afraid we won't believe it." "What are you going to do as a master? Are you encouraging him to rebel?" Chi-Heiran rolled his eyes and said, "My master is not a fool. The most important thing now is to survive, and I won't mention such things." Fei Bai breathed a sigh of relief, and then asked in confusion, "Then why did you tell him to watch over the 3 adjutants?" Chi-Heiran snorted coldly and said, "Of course it is to do something shameful. We have fallen into this situation because of the selfishness of the 3 of us. So many brothers have died. Isn't it common for them to die in battle?" Fei Bai nodded, "Master, leave this to the little one." "No." Chi-Heiran shook 2 drops of water from the kettle into his mouth vigorously, licked his lips and said, "Let Deputy General Zhong and the others do this. Kill the Emperor's secret envoy. We are on the same rope, grasshoppers. You won't be afraid of their rebellion afterwards." "Are they willing to hand over such a big handle to us?" Fei Bai worried. Chi-Heiran sighed, "That's why our soldiers from the West Camp are more useful. Most of them are single-minded, and even if they are not single-minded, they can be deterred." He added, "Vice General Zhong and the others are unwilling. As long as they want to survive, they have to do it." Vice General Zhong didn't procrastinate, and after making up his mind, he quickly found a few trustworthy battalion chiefs, and asked someone to control the 3 adjutants, and then they entered Chi-Heiran's camp with some trepidation. Vice General Zhong thought that Chi-Heiran wanted to pull up the flag of rebellion, which was too easy in the current situation. They had talked with Liu Dehei and Lin Man before, because Chi-Heiran preferred to recruit security rather than suppress bandits, so the relationship between the 2 parties was not good. Not so incompatible. Now the soldiers in the camp are full of resentment towards the imperial court. As long as Chi-Heiran waved his arms, except for a few officials with official positions, everyone else would probably agree to save their lives. Chi-Heiran raised the flag of rebellion, and the siege below would naturally be resolved without a fight. Even if he couldn't call Lin Man and Liu Dehei brothers, he could at least sit down and talk with each other. They all admired Chi-Heiran, not to mention those old hats who couldn't even form troops on the opposite side. But are they really willing to rebel against Chi-Heiran? Vice General Zhong didn't know what happened to the others. Anyway, he was not very willing. His whole family was in his hometown. If he rebelled here, the whole family would definitely not be able to escape, but he was not willing to let him be captured without a fight. If he could live, who would be willing? Die. Several other battalion chiefs also thought the same way, and everyone walked into Chi-Heiran's tent waveringly. Chi-Heiran was sitting on the ground with his arms and legs spread out. He had no choice, but he really wanted to go right, but he hadn't had enough food for 4 days, and he only slept for more than an hour a day, so it's not bad if he can still be awake. Naturally, keep your strength in the fight, and when you see a few people coming in, you wave your hands weakly and say, "Sit down wherever you want." Several people sat down awkwardly. Chi-Heiran said, "I don't want to talk nonsense with you. You are also aware of the current situation. It is impossible to rush out." The hearts of a few people felt cold, and they heard Chi Heiran say, "So I can only fool them and talk to them." Vice General Zhong asked cautiously, "How about peace talks?" Chi Heiran opened his eyelids and glanced at him, and said, "How else can we talk about peace? Naturally, they are working in collusion, tipping off the news, and trading fairly. Is it okay to recruit them? Tell them, just let us go, and we will help them deal with the court. What is the use of them wasting their troops on thousands of us? There are 200,000 troops outside." Deputy General Zhong stared at Chi Heiran with wide-eyed eyes, and Chi Heiran continued, "Even if the two sides have to fight in the end, we can also promise to both sides that we will leave a chance for them in the future, such as not killing them when fighting. Leave a gap for them when breaking through, in short, let them retreat first." Lieutenant Zhong's hearts fell from their throats to their stomachs, and by the way, they also admired Chi Heiran's shameless wit. As expected, he was expected to be a general, not me and other mortals can compare. A battalion chief raised his hand weakly and said, "General, what if they don't believe us?" "Yeah, what if they don't believe it?" Everyone looked at Chi Heiran in unison. "You must know that they are like fish like a sea when they go down the mountain. If they don't admit it in the future, what will they do?" Chi Heiran looked at them with contempt and said, "So we have to sign the contract." Chi Heiran took the official seal from Fei Bai's hand and threw it on the ground, saying, "This thing is very useful. With me as a handle, will I dare to disobey?" A few people exhaled, and then a smile appeared on their faces. They were very happy that they might get out alive without rebelling. However, the handle of this general was held by them. "What handle do you have for this general?" The few people froze, and then they heard Chi Heiran say, "The three adjutants can't let the three adjutants know about the things we discussed with the bandits, so I will leave the three to you. Take care of it, and don't miss any of them." They swallowed a mouthful of saliva and killed the emperor's secret envoy. This crime was indeed as serious as Chi Heiran's collusion with bandits. They looked at each other, thinking of the current situation. They all gritted their teeth and knelt down to accept the order. Chi Heiran waved his hand and said, "Okay, you guys go now, I will go down and chat with them tonight. If we win, we can all live, if we lose, I will die first." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 495. Lin Man read the letter back and forth 3 times, and finally couldn't help but read it again carefully. It is very common vernacular, even if he hasn't read it for a few years, he can understand it all. Could it be that Ji Feng's child's handprint on the back? Inside. Lin Man pointed the letter at the sun and the fire, but he still didn't see anything unusual. If it wasn't for the fear of destroying the letter, he really wanted to try it with water and fire. Finally, he threw the thing to Luda in a bit of anger. He said, "What do these dog officials mean? Sending a woman to deliver the letter at this time, isn't it a conspiracy?" Lu Dehe was illiterate, so he only glanced at it and threw it aside. After thinking for a while, he said, "Why don't we take that woman over and ask her carefully, is it possible that we can't even pry a woman's mouth open?" Lin Man thought so, and asked someone to bring him up. The mother-in-law who delivered the letter was fighting with each other, and she knelt down in front of the two of them with a plop. She didn't even have the strength to kowtow, and her whole body was so soft that she fell to the ground. Lin Man let out a bah and said, "You are a poor person? Then what are we who eat chaff and swallow vegetables? Say, did those dog officials send you to send news to Chi Heiran? How many people do they plan to send? Come to rescue people, when will they be rescued?" The mother-in-law burst into tears and snotted her nose and said, "My lord, the old woman is really a poor person. I am from Xinzhou Prefecture, where the golden soldiers beat the grass valley every year. The old woman's parents-in-law and husband all died, and the children were also scattered. Lost and lost, I had to sell myself as a slave even if I survived. Although the master's family did not lack food and clothing, but there was also a lot of work to do, and the mother-in-law was stupid, so this kind of hard work fell on me. Lin Man said a little irritably, "Did I ask you this? What I asked was why the court officials sent you here." Lu Dehe squinted his eyes and observed the mother-in-law carefully. Although he was illiterate, his mind was much more careful than Lin Man's. He was more willing to believe what his eyes saw and what his brain analyzed than listening. The old woman wiped her tears and snot, and said, "The old woman was sent by the fourth grandmother, and has nothing to do with the officials. The fourth grandmother has a hard life, and she will be a widow within 2 years after she was married." Lin Man was about to get irritable, but was suppressed by Lu Dehe, and asked in a slow voice, "The fourth grandma you are talking about is Chi Heiran's daughter-in-law?" The mother-in-law nodded again and again. "She is really the daughter-in-law of our fourth master. She only married in the first 2 years, and she is only 16 this year. She is very young. The kings take pity on her. Please let our fourth master go." Lin Man sneered, "Is he pitiful? He is an official, and my father is a bandit. Who is pitiful? That kid married a wife in his teens, and my father is almost 30 and still a bachelor. Who is pitiful for his grandma?" The mother-in-law stared at him blankly, unable to find a word to refute for a while. But Lu Dehe asked, "You said you were sent by your fourth grandma, why did she send you here at this time? Isn't this harming you?" The mother-in-law came back to her senses, and hurriedly defended her fourth grandma. "Fourth grandma can't do anything about it. The book that the fourth master asked for help arrived 17 days ago, and you have surrounded our fourth master for 18 days. It is not yet determined whether to save people or not." Lin Man and Lu Dehe sneered. They both despised the imperial court in their hearts, and at the same time let go of a lot of heartstrings. "Our master doesn't care about the fourth master, and the uncle is far away in the north, and there is no one in the court to speak for our fourth master. Our fourth grandma is so anxious that she doesn't think about eating and drinking, but she was murdered by a traitor and gave birth prematurely. In the end, both mother and child were safe, but our fourth grandma was also frightened, saying that if something happened to the fourth master, the two of them might not be able to survive in the capital, so they wrote a letter for the old woman to bring, saying that even if they died, the fourth master should know she gave birth to him a son, and made him feel more at ease. If the two of them fail to survive, let him know, and Huang Quan Road will be a good family companion." The mother-in-law wiped her tears and said, "The mother-in-law didn't want to come, and she might not be able to survive now, but the fourth grandma said that the rebels said they were bandits, but they were also ordinary people who were forced to die. I was going all the way, and the fourth grandmother also promised me that if the letter could be delivered, no matter whether I could go back alive or not, she wrote a letter to the uncle, asking the uncle to help me find my lost children, and promised to bring them up. But the kindness of the sky, the old lady has nothing to worry about, so she came. You two kings, please do me a favor and let our fourth master go." Lin Man asked irritably, "Are you going to let him kill us?" Lu Dehe said with a smile, "How about this, you go and tell your fourth master, just say that those dog officials caused your fourth grandma to give birth prematurely, so how about letting him join us?" With Chi Heiran's abilities, more than 30,000 of them surrounded him with 3,000 people, and they asked him to guard him for 18 days. If such a talent can be used by him, why not worry about it? The mother-in-law was stunned, and quickly waved her hands and said, "This is impossible, it will kill people. If the fourth master joins you, then the fourth grandma and the third young master will really die. As long as we don't tell, who will know? When the time comes, ask someone to secretly go to the capital to steal your fourth grandma and third young master out, won't it be enough?" "No, no, The old woman shouted, "There is an army of 200,000 guarding outside. There may be people who inquire about the news. As soon as the fourth master surrenders, the capital will know immediately." The great crime, the old woman dare not persuade. Lin Man and Lu Dehe froze, sat up straight and said, "What did you say? 200,000 troops, where are they?" The mother-in-law looked at them in a daze. "You don't know, my cousin and my fourth grandma said that the emperor dispatched 200,000 troops from somewhere to frighten us, and they are now outside Jinghu Lake." Lin Man didn't believe it. He stared at her fiercely and said, "Are you taking us for fools? There are 200,000 troops outside, why don't you come to save people?" The mother-in-law cried out, "The mother-in-law really doesn't know. My cousin said it was for the sake of the overall situation." "How can the mother-in-law know the overall situation?" "Okay," Lu Dehe waved his hand and said, "You go down first. If you dare to do other actions, I will kill you regardless of whether you are poor or not." The old woman shuddered and obediently let someone take her down. Lin Man stared at him with hanging eyes. "You don't really believe her words, do you?" Lu Dehe lowered his eyes and said, "Don't forget, besides our two families, there are 7 or 8 families on Jinghu South Road. They have a total of 100,000 people in their hands. You said that the 200,000 troops will go deep alone to rescue them. 3,000 people and in turn surrounded by 100,000 rebels." Lin Man's face turned pale, and he said, "You mean we were really made dumplings by an army of 200,000, while the 3,000 people like Chi Heiran were abandoned?" Lu Dehe said nothing, but his attitude already explained the problem. Lin Man cursed angrily, and asked, "Our two families are here to fight with Chi Heiran and don't know the news outside, what about the others? Don't they know that they are surrounded by court officers and soldiers?" Lu Dehe raised his eyelids and glanced at him, and said, "Do you think it's possible? The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 496. So, the two of them were calculated and given up. Although they are all bandits, they have been robbing each other for territory, people, and food in recent years, but when they encounter officers and soldiers, they all stay together and at least communicate with each other. No one notified them when they were surrounded. Let their troops be consumed by Chi Heiran's 3,000 soldiers. Lin Man was just annoyed, but Lu Dehe had much more to think about, such as whether the news they got from the imperial court to encircle and suppress them was true or not, and whether they were also plotted against when they came to besiege Chi Heiran this time. Could it be that they were abandoned by their companions like Chi Heiran? Or is it that some of them colluded with the imperial court to consume them slowly, and then wipe them all out? The more Lu Dehe thought about it, the more uneasy he felt, and now Lin Man was in trouble, so he didn't hide these small thoughts, but broke away and talked to Lin Man, saying, "Chi Heiran is a general who has beaten Jin Bing, dealing with us mud-legged people is like a magic soldier. Brother Lin, we surrounded him for 18 days. He was short of food and drink, and he didn't even have many weapons. But tell me, how long can you take him down?" Lin Man hesitated. If there is still food on him, it shouldn't be difficult to persist for another 10 days. Elder brother can figure it out, but don't those spirits who hold tens of thousands of soldiers know? Lin Man's face was full of anger. "We have become a gun in someone else's hands." Lu Dehe sighed, "Who told us that our strength is inferior to others? Then our brothers' lives can't be wasted like this." Lin Man yelled, "This matter can't just be left alone." Lu Dehe lowered his eyes, and Lin Man said, "Hey, shall we still surround Chi Heiran?" Lu Dehe thought for a while and said, "Let that woman read the letter to Chi Heiran at the foot of the mountain and see his reaction before we talk." Lin Man thought so too. It just so happened that it was time for a truce, so he directly asked someone to take the woman to the foot of the mountain, and asked her to read the letter to Chi Heiran down there. The mother-in-law is illiterate, but she had memorized the letter before she came here. The letter written by Mu Yangling is in vernacular, just like homely, easy to remember, so the mother-in-law can shout it out without worrying about it. With pause. Chi-Heiran was having his last dinner on the mountain when he heard a rough voice from the foot of the mountain, "Heiran, my child, and I miss you." Chi-Heiran sprayed out a mouthful of dry rations. Deputy General Zhong and several battalion chiefs looked at Chi-Heiran with strange expressions. The soldiers were a little dazed, and it took a while to realize that Heiran was their general's name. While patting Chi-Heiran on the back, Fei Bai cursed angrily, "Master, they are slandering you." Chi-Heiran shook his hand. Fei Bai thought he meant not to argue with them, but when he thought of their master's handsome and martial arts, a group of bandits would frame him like this, he was furious, stood up, and shouted back, "Our master's name is what you can do, are you barking? To use such a despicable method to slander our general, our fourth grandma is as beautiful as a fairy, and any cat or dog who comes from anywhere dares to bark like this." Lin Man and Lu Dehei at the bottom of the mountain were stunned for a moment, but before they could yell back, the woman shouted excitedly, "Young Master Fei Bai, you are a servant, and this servant was sent by fourth grandma to deliver a letter to fourth master." Before waiting for the question from the mountain, the mother-in-law immediately shouted, "Fourth master, fourth grandma gave birth to you a fat boy, weighing 7 catties and 6 tails." The mother-in-law yelled too loudly, her voice was a bit broken, she took a breath, and the people down the mountain heard a loud and smug voice from the mountain, "Ha ha ha, I have a son. Aling gave birth to me, a son. Ha ha ha." As soon as the words were finished, the mother-in-law was out of breath, and then shouted out the next sentence, "Fourth grandma asked the servant to come and tell you, so that you won't be unsafe when you leave." The laughter on the mountain seemed to be cut off with a click, and the people down the mountain suddenly burst into laughter. Even Lin Man, who had already known the truth, laughed loudly. Vice General Zhong and the others were both happy and sad for Chi-Heiran, but when the woman yelled out her words, they couldn't help but burst out laughing, and then tried their best to suppress their smiles, but their shoulders shook violently. Chi-Heiran frowned, and shouted, "Why are you laughing? Don't laugh." Chi-Heiran shouted down the mountain, "What are you spreading nonsense? Is the master so easy to die? Go back and tell your grandma, wait for the master at home honestly, and see how I deal with her when I go back." Seeing that Chi-Heiran was angry, the mother-in-law immediately took out Mu Yangling's letter and shouted, "Fourth master, fourth grandma wrote you a letter, but the kings at the foot of the mountain don't let the slaves go up the mountain, and the slaves are on the mountain. I will read to you at my feet." Mu Yangling's letter is very simple, the key is that she also knows that most of these letters will be checked, so she is very bachelor, so she writes some words between husband and wife. The first sentence is "I miss you." The expression of emotion is straightforward and warm. It can be called the head of the ancients, but it has no sense of beauty. Those who have been fortunate enough to have seen this letter overtly and secretly shook their heads and sighed, "Sure enough, she is a woman who has never read a book." Then she explained that she gave birth to him a son on a certain day and at a certain moment. His son was not only strong but also well behaved. He cried twice when he was born to show that he came to this world, and then went to sleep. At dawn, he knew to look for something to eat when he got up the next day. He was very smart. Feeding milk was like fighting a war. After a meal, he could break out a head of sweat. At first glance, he was as strong as his father. Both downhill and uphill fell silent, and the only sound was the rough roar of the woman. Obviously it is the most vernacular, the most common household letter, but for some reason, everyone feels a little sad in their hearts. The mother-in-law finally shouted, "I know that you are determined to be a general. I didn't stop you when you fought against gold and captives before, but now you have a wife and children, and you are not facing an immortal barbarian. So you can't rush forward blindly, but if you have a slight chance of surviving, whether you run away or hide, try to survive anyway. My son and I are waiting for you at home." The mother-in-law cleared her throat after yelling. In the silence of the mountain, Her voice really had no sense of beauty, and she didn't put any emotion into it when she read the letter, she just shouted out. But at this time, after 18 days of fighting, everyone, already exhausted, not only on the mountain, but also the bandits down the mountain. At this time, they heard that the general high on the mountain had a wife and children at home like them, and his family also hoped for them to go back, thinking of their past. For a moment, I hated and pitied him, hating that he was clearly the same person. Why did they have to ruin their families? I also feel sorry for his widowed wife and weak children. I am afraid that I feel sad, but for a while, I think that he is also ordered to work, and he is also a hero who resists gold, so I don't know how to make a choice. In fact, there are only two things that really stir everyone's heartstrings. Chi-Heiran has a wife and a child, and the son was just born, and a child can always soften people's hearts. The second point is that Chi-Heiran was an anti-gold general before, and the bandits at the foot of the mountain knew that the general on the mountain was called Chi-Heiran, and he was the younger brother of Chi Ziyuan, the general of the western camp, who had just been dispatched from the Northland not long ago. Now Chi Ziyuan is a hero second only to General Yuan. Everyone in Dazhu, from a 70-year-old man to a 5-year-old child, really knows him. Thanks again to Dejo for his free speech and information that is slightly more developed than in the past. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 497. Vice General Zhong said, "General, this letter comes at a very good time. If it hadn't been confirmed that they would not be able to communicate with the outside world since half a month ago, Deputy General Zhong would have thought that this trip was also arranged by Chi-Heiran in order to increase the success of the evening operation." Chi-Heiran understood what Lieutenant Zhong meant, and the arrival of this letter was undoubtedly the best reason for him to do so. For the sake of his wife and children, and in order to survive, it was not unthinkable for him to trade with the bandits once. Chi-Heiran said, "Ask a clever boy to deliver the letter, and let the brothers take the time to rest. When I go down the mountain, the whole battalion must be on guard. If I can't come back, whether you surrender or escape depends on your own will. Anyway, they are not Tartars, and there is nothing shameful in begging for mercy if they survive." Vice General Zhong lowered his head and retreated. In the evening, not long after Tianatian He, another letter appeared in Lin Man's hand. He scratched his head, and finally threw it to Lu Dehe in hesitation, and asked, "Chi-Heiran is serious? He's not afraid, did we inform him?" Lu Dehe handed the letter to the deputy on the side, and he read it in his ear. Lu Dehe pondered for a moment and said, "It's not good for us to report him, it's better to reciprocate, but this matter has to be done carefully, discuss carefully, we can't agree on what he says, and he has to keep something, otherwise what if he turns his face afterwards?" Lin Man agreed when he heard it, then asked him to come down the mountain and have a talk. He turned to his assistant and said, "Find a nimble boy to find a tree in the southeast and hang up the oil lamp, and you take someone to pick up Chi-Heiran. The last time I saw that kid, I thought he was just a fledgling dandy, but who knows that he is capable. The past 10 days have exhausted us to death." Not long after, an oil lamp was hung on a tree in the southeast. When the people on the mountain saw it, Chi-Heiran heaved a sigh of relief. Since the other party let go, then they had a chance. He turned his head and nodded slightly to Deputy General Zhong, and led the three of them down the mountain. Fei Bai followed closely beside Chi-Heiran, holding the handle of the knife tightly at his waist. Chi-Heiran glanced at him, and said in a low voice, "Relax, Master is here to negotiate, not to fight. Why are you holding that thing so tightly?" Only then did Fei Bai loosen his hand slightly. When Chi-Heiran saw Lin Man and Lu Dehe, the first thing he did was to read his beloved wife's letter. Lu Dehe had been prepared for a long time and handed him the letter paper with the child's handprint on it. Chi-Heiran did not expect such a surprise on the letter. He stared blankly at the little paw on it, his eyes slightly wet. He hurriedly put the letter away and stuffed it in his arms, looked up at the tent, stared hard, and said, "Then, let's talk about peace talks." The voice is hoarse, completely different from the slightly deep voice before, with a bit of mellowness. "This is, crying." Lin Man and Lu Dehe looked at Chi Heiran's eyes curiously, but they saw his eyes widened and stared at the two of them, but they still saw the water stains in it. Lu Dehe was suspicious. He killed Jin Bing, and the general who went to the battlefield is so sentimental? No matter how suspicious Lu Dehe was, everyone started negotiating anyway. Lin Man and Lu Dehe are very satisfied with the deal proposed by Chi Heiran, but there are too many bandits on South Jing South Road, and Chi Heiran may not necessarily be the two of them who will be surrounded and suppressed by then. Therefore, it is stated in the contract that once Chi Heiran does not bring soldiers, or the troops that are not theirs, they are obliged to provide them with the latest news about the activities of officers and soldiers, limited to the military operations against Lu Dehe and Lin Man, and the number of times is 5. Chi Heiran thought for a long time, and finally agreed. After the two parties reached a consensus and signed the contract, Chi Heiran's official seal came in handy at this time, stamping a big seal on the contract, and discussing the next specific actions. Chi Heiran stuffed a full stomach of snacks from Lin Man. Then I went up the mountain. Chi Heiran went back to the mountain and informed Deputy General Zhong and others to act the next day. Everyone was relieved and went to rest. The people above knew that they were counted as alive, so although they were on guard tonight, they felt relieved a lot, but the people below, the soldiers, didn't know that they were already full for dinner and didn't know how much dry food they had left. As time went by, they became more and more desperate and panicked. Some people even cried softly at night. Early the next morning, no food was distributed in the camp, and the soldiers gradually became panicked. Chi Heiran gathered them together and said, "The food in the camp is already empty." As soon as these words came out, the faces of the soldiers turned pale. "But we have also encountered a new life." It should be said that it is the last life. Chi Heiran stared at them and said, "According to the report from the scouts, the bandits below have also reached the exhaustion period. Today they decided to gather for the last charge, and when they arrived at that time, there was a short gap in the western slope. If we can rush through, then we can survive. If not, we have to stay here forever. Brothers, do you have the courage to rush out after me?" Everyone looked at Chi Heiran silently. Without saying a word, Chi Heiran said, "This time, I will rush to the front. If I die, I will pave the way for you. If I live, I will pave the way for you. I will ask again, do you have a plan? Are you brave enough to follow me out?" This time everyone was still silent, but their eyes gradually became firmer, and everyone opened their mouths to make a yes mouth shape. According to the rules in the army, such confidential matters cannot be announced at this time, so even if everyone wants to answer him, they can only express it with their eyes. Chi Heiran looked back at them, clenched his right fist and thumped his left chest, saying, "To survive." The soldiers silently beat their left chests with their right hands and lowered their heads. Chi Heiran immediately asked people to sneak to the gentle slope to the west, which he had discussed with Lu Dehe Linman last night, and their people would withdraw as soon as the time came, and he rushed out with his people, but Chi Heiran couldn't do it. They have complete trust in Lu Dehe and the others, so letting Vice General Zhong lead the way to the rear, it is not so easy for Lu Dehe and the others to repent and plot against them, and they will have time to retreat when the time comes. Chi Heiran had a good plan, leading someone to rush out quietly almost as soon as the other person disappeared from their sight. Lin Man looked at them and asked, "Is this how you let people go? Are you capable of keeping them?" Lin Man was silent. "Then why bother to keep them? I am very satisfied with the conditions last night." Lin Man pouted, "Then why did you come here so early in the morning? I thought you were going to go back on your word. Come and see the excitement and see if he really believes in us so much." "What's the conclusion?" Lin Man asked curiously. "The conclusion is that Chi Heiran is really not stupid." Lu Dehe turned and left while speaking, Tell the people below that the acting is more realistic. As long as no one is dead or disabled, it is normal to bleed a little. Chi-Heiran and the others rushed out of the encirclement in one breath, and they couldn't believe it when they finally collapsed on the ground out of breath. The soldiers sat on the ground in a daze, so they rushed out. It's too easy. Chi-Heiran couldn't take a break. He seized the time to deploy defenses, and then he called Deputy General Zhong and asked, "Where is the nearest supply point? We need to get something to eat." Deputy General Zhong immediately said, "There is a big village 25 miles to the south, it should be able to supply supplies." Chi-Heiran turned his head with a huh, stared at him and said, "If you let me know that you have such thoughts, I will kill you." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 498. Lieutenant Zhong's face paled, and he said in a low voice, "General, the soldiers have been hungry for a long time, and there may be pursuers behind." "So what?" Chi-Heiran interrupted him, "if you enter the village, are you any different from bandits? Why not surrender quickly on the mountain? Where is the nearest supply point?" Chi-Heiran stared at him and asked again. "Generally, the garrison has supply points in places. Only the upper-level confidants know about these places. Chi-Heiran just took over the army not long ago, and started fighting as soon as he came up. The previous supplies were all provided by the imperial court. There is not much in those supply points. Or whether the contents inside can be eaten is not certain, so Chi-Heiran didn't ask. But now the yamen in the Jinghu area is like a fake, and there are bandits everywhere. If they want to supply, they can only find these small supply points. No matter how small a mosquito is, it is meat. At this time, they only need to have a meal to have the strength to escape and join the imperial army." Vice General Zhong lowered his head and said, "There is a small supply point 58 miles to the east, but the general is not sure that it is still there. After all, bandits are rampant now. Rest for another quarter of an hour, and head east, and make sure to arrive before dark," Chi-Heiran directly ordered. The soldiers regained their vitality. Although they were hungry and tired, they still walked towards the supply point full of confidence. In the past, the army's supply points were replenished and managed by the imperial court and local officials. 9 of the 10 supply points were empty. Later, there were military fields and military households. Naturally, the supply points were the responsibility of each garrison. Chi-Heiran thought that no matter how bad the situation was, it will not be worse than in the hands of the magistrates. The fact is that although there is grain in the warehouse of the supply point, all the grain is moldy and blackened old rice. Chi-Heiran rubbed the rice in his hands, and looked back at Vice General Zhong and the others indifferently. Deputy General Zhong and Chief Chien of Zhongying lowered their heads, not daring to look at Chi-Heiran. Chi-Heiran took a deep breath, suppressed his anger, and said, "Tell people to bury the pot and cook." Deputy General Zhong let out a breath and hurriedly called someone in to move the grain out. He didn't mind the moldy and blackened rice in the warehouse at all. They were starving to death now, so why would they care about this? Fibei's face was also very ugly. "Master, they are too much, the whole storehouse is full of moldy grain, eating too much of this kind of food will hurt your stomach, how can the soldiers fight?" "Now is not the time to worry about this," Chi-Heiran said meaningfully, "as long as you can survive, there will be opportunities to settle accounts. But fourth master, you've been hungry for several days, how can your stomach bear it if you eat these things at this time?" Chi-Heiran rolled his eyes and said, "My master even drank horse urine before, what's a few taels of moldy rice? There are many hungry masters in the army. If you say this again, be careful that I will beat you." Although Chi-Heiran didn't dare to say that he could completely share the joys and sorrows with the soldiers, he would never do something special at this time to chill the hearts of the soldiers. The food at the supply point was saved from their rations, but now it suddenly turned into moldy rice. Even if he was newly transferred, the food reserves had nothing to do with him, and Chi-Heiran couldn't completely shirk his responsibility because he was theirs. The general is their current chief, so he is naturally responsible for everything now. As for who he will find to be responsible in the end, it is a question for their upper echelons. The rice that was carried out gave off an unpleasant musty smell. The soldiers washed the rice several times before fetching water from the nearby river for cooking. And Huato Yueying took a few pairs of people to pick some wild vegetables nearby, and let some people who still had strength go into the mountain to see if they could catch some prey with luck. Chi-Heiran was still repeatedly rubbing those moldy black rice grains in his hands, and his face sank into the water. Vice General Zhong thought for a while, then leaned forward and said, "Fourth Master, the situation at this supply point is not good. There is another supply point 25 miles north from here, and the situation at that point should be better." Chi-Heiran slightly opened his fingers a few slits, and the rice in his hand only moved a little and then stopped moving. If it was good rice, it would have flowed out along his fingers. He threw away the rice in his hand, clapped his hands and asked curiously, "Vice General Zhong, where did you find this kind of grain? If it weren't for the fact that we were about to starve to death, this kind of stuff cost 100 taels of silver to beg the brothers to eat. Brothers don't even carry a pair of chopsticks. The rice grains have turned black and musty. It is said that such things should have been thrown away long ago. The reform of the military system has only lasted for 3 or 4 years. How did you turn the grain into this?" Chi-Heiran looked at him. Deputy Zhong's heart trembled, and he opened his mouth. He wanted to make up some reasons to confuse him, but he couldn't say any reason to Chi-Heiran's eyes that seemed to see everything. Those who are familiar with Chi-Heiran know that his eyes are just an expression of anger and annoyance, so the eyes subconsciously widen slightly, appearing extremely clear, as if nothing in this world can be hidden from him. But he was only angry because of the behavior of Deputy General Zhong and the others, and he was annoyed at the fact that he couldn't figure out the reason for the rice mildew. Deputy General Zhong thought to himself, since Chi-Heiran is already their general, it is impossible to hide the situation of this supply point from him in the future, so why not take this opportunity to give him a psychological preparation? The impact of the incident may be smaller. Vice General Zhong said with mixed truth and falsehood, "Return to the general, these moldy rice are not military rations handed over by military households at all, but bought back by our former generals and wealthy businessmen." Vice General Zhong sighed and said, "The general is also a leader in battle. You should know that there are not many Lucians for 4th-rank generals. In the past, the military pay and food were paid by the imperial court. Although there are often deductions, as long as the number of people who report is large several times, we can still have some spare salary. Several senior officials in the army rely on this to support their families, and the reform of the military system seems to be of great benefit to us, but we only have such a few people, and the land we have allocated is also planted. No, in addition to the many natural and man-made disasters in recent years, the military rations handed over by the military households are barely enough to eat. There is no way to buy food for the supply point, but the imperial court wants to send people down to check the warehouse. In desperation, the general had no choice but to ask everyone to take some money out to make up enough money for the army, found a rich businessman, and bought the moldy grain in his hands. This thing was originally used for inspection. How could everyone think that this thing would save everyone's life today? Chi-Heiran was very suspicious of what Vice Admiral Zhong said. He had heard about empty pay, but he had never seen it before, because all the empty pay in the West Camp were punished by his brother's military law. Therefore, Chi-Heiran was able to live here in a healthy state. Growing up in the environment, at least he has not been polluted by character since he was a child, and his IQ is even less likely to degrade because of it. However, although he doubts the other party's words, it is not good to ask questions at this time, and continue to worry about what he saw when he went to the next stronghold tomorrow. Will it also be the musty black rice? But Fei touched it quietly and said in a low voice, Master, he lied to you. It was simply that they colluded with each other to sell the soldiers military and food salaries, and bought moldy rice as good rice to avoid inspection. Just now a veteran told Xiao yes, they had been eating old rice for more than a year before the Lord went. Although the rice was not as black and moldy as it is now, it was still dry. Everyone had planted the land, and they knew the rice by touching it. Stayed for at least 4 or 5 years. Chi Heiran's face was cold and stern, and he nodded and said, I see, don't break through this matter first, the first thing is to break out, everyone can't be divorced at this time, and also, find a way to reply to your fourth grandma, I don't know her now. Worrying about what to do. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 499. Chi Heiran only sent back a sentence to Mu Yangling, I am safe. Mu Yangling read this sentence 3 or 4 times, and then she was sure that she read it correctly. She leaned on the pillow and couldn't help crying wow. The son on the side opened his round eyes in fright. He turned his head to look at his mother for a moment, and then burst into tears with a wow. Li Shun and Guyu were in a hurry, fourth grandma, please stop crying, you are still in confinement, and it is a good thing that fourth master is safe and sound. Yes, yes, you see that the young master is crying with you until his face turns red. Guyu patted the child distressfully. Mu Yangling stepped forward to pick up his son, hugged him in front of him, and cried hard, son, your father is still alive at last, why don't you say he has such a short memory, and tell him to remember to name you, but still forgot, it's fine if you forgot to choose your name, but how can you not say a few more words about such a big event when you were born? Just bring back this sentence, when he comes back in the future, you must not call him dad, you have to ask him to apologize to you. Li Chun and Guyu looked at each other, thinking that Mu Yangling was overjoyed, shook his head, and the two left the house. Li Shun went to the kitchen to watch Mu Yangling's Chinese food, while Guyu fetched water to wash Mu Yangling's face, and when Kui rushed over, how is the fourth grandma? Li Chun was taken aback, and said with a smile, sister, when Kui is here, our fourth grandma is well, why do you ask that? When Kui looked the two of them up and down and said, who are you lying to? Just now my mother-in-law went to report that the fourth grandma was crying while hugging the third young master, and almost scared our eldest grandma to the ground. Okay, grandma couldn't leave at this moment, so she asked me to come over and have a look. Li Chun and Guyu were stunned, and asked, second young master is not feeling well, he hurriedly explained, our fourth grandma received the letter from fourth master, and she was so happy that she hugged third young master and cried. Are you all right? You still want to play with our third young master? Who said it wasn't? Wen Quikyung said with a smile, but it's hot summer now, and the weather in the south of the Yangtze River is a bit abnormal. It may be that the wind blows in the small garden yesterday, so I keep running nose and crying, which means that the second young master is crying softly. You didn't hear that? Since the fourth grandma is fine, then I will go and answer with confidence. You take good care of the fourth grandma these 2 days. If you are fine, don't go to our yard, so as not to get sick. It doesn't matter if you are an adult. There is still a little girl in your yard, the ancestors are here. Li Shun and Guyu immediately responded when they heard the words, and when Guyu came back from fetching water, he told Mu Yangling about Xiaobeo's illness. What did Dr. Sun say? Dr. Sun said that the evil wind has entered the body. Although there is no serious problem, the child is delicate, especially the second young master is a premature baby, so be extra careful. In that case, go and tell the eldest grandma, and say that I don't need her to worry about it, and let her take care of the second young master wholeheartedly. Guyu responded, and Mu Yangling asked Li Shun to call the guards to inform Fan Zijin that Qi Heiran's letter had arrived. Fan Zijin only asked someone to reply got it, and he didn't come over at all, because he also received Qi Heiran's letter, which was even much longer than Mu Yangling's letter. One word goes so far. Yan Mo really wanted to remind his father that although Biao Gongzu wrote him a long letter, half of the letter was used for serious business, and the other half was Biao Gongzi, who kept showing off that he was a father and begged his father he had to take more care of Biao Gongzi's family. He really didn't understand what a young master who didn't say a word had to be proud of. Fan Zijin was only too proud, so he put his mind on the business. Qi Heiran has now escaped from the siege of Lu Dehei and Lin Man. As long as he hides his whereabouts and escapes from Jinghu Lake, he will be able to join the Imperial Army, completely safe. Therefore, Fan Zijin wanted to prompt the Imperial Army to go out. Whether it was for deterrence to better recruit security, or to really suppress bandits, the 200,000 troops surrounding the Jinghu area must march as soon as possible. Only in this way can the site be drawn away. Only then can the rebel forces be restrained, and Qi Heiran will be safer. Fan Zijin understands this truth, and everyone else understands it, too. It was the secret report that entered Beijing one step faster than Qi Heiran's letter. Qi Heiran led people to break through successfully, but he didn't know the details, but they only had less than half of the people left. No one would believe that Qi Heiran escaped from the encirclement alive, and brought more than 1,400 people with him. In view of everyone's doubts about the secret report, the emperor had to call Fan Zijin, who had received the letter from Qi Heiran, to the court. He also knew that Mu Yangling had also received a note, but the content on it was too boring, and the other party was a woman, so Fan Zijin had to come up. Fan Zijin was still a little confused when he entered the palace, and the eunuch who delivered the decree didn't reveal a word to him. Although he is now a Jinshi, he is actually not in the official system of the imperial court, because he did not take the Shujishi examination, so when the same subject has already taken root in the Imperial Academy or the 6 departments or places, he is still doing business. He stood here for the second time since the last time he came to the palace for the test. The emperor gently asked about the letter Qi Heiran had written to him, and told him about the doubts of the courtiers, hoping that he could give everyone the answer for Qi Heiran. Fan Zijin raised his head slightly proudly and said, "Your Majesty, this is General Qi's ability and his luck. The student doesn't know why the ministers are suspicious." Fan Zijin had passed the imperial examination, so he was a student of the emperor, so he called himself a student in front of the emperor. Those surrounded at the foot of the mountain are nothing but a mob composed of landless peasants. Although there are more than 30,000 people, they belong to 2 different factions. They besieged Heiran for 18 days, but they didn't even have a hem of Heiran's clothes. If you encounter it, you can see the incompetence of the rebels. However, Heiran has been familiar with military books since he was a child, and was later personally taught by his elder brother. It may be impossible for him to take down 30,000 people with 3,000 people, but it is not impossible for him to hold the position. Your Majesty, you look, isn't he doing it now? The emperor looked down at Fan Zijin and asked, Qi Qing didn't mention the details in the letter. Fan Zijin said indifferently, is there any specific history, but I mentioned a few words, saying that Lu Dehei and Lin Man had conflicts, and the attack has slowed down recently, so he seized the opportunity and ran away with people. Yes, Your Majesty, Heiran is still at a loss, but he has nothing to eat or drink. Please send an army to rescue him as soon as possible, and wipe out the Jinghu rebels. The emperor twitched his lips, looked at the silent officials below, thought for a while and said, Fan Qing is right, let the army go out immediately, march forward and make sure to take down all the 130,000 rebels in Jinghu. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 500. Of course, the emperor didn't really ask them to kill or arrest all 130,000 rebels. He did have this wish, but the 200,000 army was against the 130,000, not to mention how much food and grass they needed. Can't afford it? The emperor just wanted to give those rebels a warning and let them accept the recruitment honestly. After all, if a fight really started, their losses would be huge. If there is no war, those people just need to concentrate on fighting them, but the court still has many concerns. The officials also knew that this was the art of speaking, so no one was so stupid as to come out to correct the emperor, so this decision spread to the Jinghu area for some reason. In the eyes of the rebels, it was the emperor who couldn't bear it and decided to send troops to fight them to the death signal of. The bandits were panicked at first, and then they started to communicate and discuss forming an alliance to resist the imperial army. Even Liu Dehe and Lin Man rushed to participate with anxiety. As for the two who recently fought against the imperial army, they were met by other bandit leaders cordially in turn, and unanimously inquired about the strength of the imperial court with them. Because the battle between Liu Dehe and Lin Man was really ugly. More than 30,000 people surrounded 3,000 people and the general called the dog officer took them out. The words were ugly, but there was a lot of sarcasm, so the two of them felt very aggrieved along the way. They wanted to talk about their hearts and resolve each other, but everyone felt that their relationship was not good. Every time as soon as they get together, there are people who follow them around, and the euphemistic name is, to persuade them to prevent them from conflicting. But in fact, it's just to watch the fun. The faces of the two of them became darker, and they passed by in a hurry when they finally got together to discuss strategies. Still pay attention to Chi Heiran's movements. When the time comes, we will directly bring people to his side, and directly confront Chi Heiran. We have his with the handle in his hand, he will definitely not dare to do anything to us, we will discuss it and let him let us go. Lin Man agreed to Liu Dehe's strategy, and went back to watch the alliance's melee with peace of mind. They were fighting inseparably in order to elect a leader. At this time, Chi Heiran, whom Liu Dehe Linman placed high hopes on, was running around on the dirt road with more than 1,400 remnants of soldiers. Only when the sun was about to rise, Chi Heiran ordered to rest on the spot, and the soldiers immediately rolling on the grass on both sides of the road, or running straight into the woods and lying down. I was really exhausted. Chi Heiran sat cross-legged on the ground, took out a piece of dry food and stuffed it into his mouth, then took out the map, finally clicked on a point, and said, "You can go out from here to Tongren. Tongren is not occupied by the rebels." In the middle, it is not known whether the Tongren defenders participated in the action of encircling and suppressing the rebels. Deputy General Zhong said while drinking water, "I think I will definitely participate. It would be nice to leave 1,000 people to defend the city." He looked at the hard cake in his hand sadly. "I don't know if Tongren has any military rations to supply." They found a lot of supply points along the way, most of which were moldy grains. As early as a few days ago, they left the range of Hangzhou, and the supply points they found behind were all from other garrisons. It wasn't just the Hangzhou garrison who did this. Lieutenant Zhong was so angry that he scolded corrupt officials for several days. Chi Heiran looked at him with disdain. "Is it interesting to scold yourself?" Lieutenant Zhong choked until his face turned red, but he didn't dare to complain anymore. Chi Heiran didn't want to disturb the people, they just passed through the village and didn't enter. They also knew that Chi Heiran's military discipline was strict, so no one dared to commit crimes and rob the people by force. Deputy General Zhong thought that the soldiers might not be able to survive after 2 days. He and Chi Heiran protested, and then he could take the opportunity to force Chi Heiran to agree to their self-sufficiency, but who knows that Chi Heiran's requirements are strict, and the soldiers below not only did not make trouble, but became more convinced by him. Deputy General Zhong saw Chi Heiran gradually taking control of the entire army from him, but he didn't dare to make any moves. Although he had Chi Heiran's handle, Chi Heiran also held his lifeline. They had successfully broken through the siege and had subdued several confidants, and their prestige in the army was getting stronger. In addition, he was already higher than him, and Vice General Zhong's control over the army gradually weakened. Thinking of having to eat several more meals of moldy dry food, Deputy General Zhong took a bite of the dry food, and then swallowed it down vigorously. After the hottest period passed, Chi Heiran got up and led the crowd to continue marching, and a scout came to report, "General, there is a village ahead, do you want to stop and rest tonight?" Chi Heiran looked up at the sky, and ordered, "Don't stop, it doesn't matter where you go before dark." Now the discipline of the army looks very good, and the soldiers are willing to follow him to eat moldy dry food, and will not disturb the people, but if they live in the village and see other people eating rice, eating as much as they have, even women and children, can the tired army really continue to maintain this strict discipline? Chi Heiran would not take such a gamble. However, Deputy General Zhong and the soldiers under him just thought that Chi Heiran didn't want to disturb the common people, so they continued to follow Chi Heiran without any expression, but when they were about to pass through the village, Chi Heiran stopped. Deputy General Zhong asked puzzledly, "General, what's wrong?" Chi Heiran looked at the village with a frown, raised his nose, and finally frowned and called a scout, "Go into the village and take a look, be careful." The scout didn't know why, but turned around and ran into the village. This village is very close to the main road, but more than 300 meters, and the overlapping of houses in the village can be clearly seen among the trees. It can be seen that the conditions are not bad. Chi Heiran walked along the road with his people, but there was no reaction in the village at all. If the villagers hid because they were afraid of military disasters, what about the dogs they raised? More than 1,400 of them did not deliberately reduce the movement, so this small movement would definitely startle the dogs raised by the people in the village. They had heard dogs barking when they passed around some villages before. Chi Heiran felt something was wrong all the time, until he got to the bottom of the air vent and smelled a faint smell of blood, then he felt that the village was too quiet, so quiet that people felt weird. Chi Heiran looked in the direction of the village with a sullen face, and the scout he sent out ran back with a pale face, and said in a slightly trembling voice, "General, something happened in the village, and there are all corpses. The subordinates are not sure whether the murderer is still hiding in the village or not. So I dare not say anything." Chi Heiran sank face into the water. "How long is the corpse?" The scout paused and said, "This subordinate has touched 2 of them, they are already cold, and their blood has already coagulated. Judging by the corpse spots on their faces, it must be a long time. The possibility of the murderer still staying in the village is very small, and it is unknown whether there are still people alive in the village." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 501. Chi Heiran waved his hands to let the soldiers enter the village in a defensive position. The village is not big, with only about 60 households, but no one survived. People up to 70 years old, down to 2-year-old babies, and even pregnant women have not escaped the murderous hands. It should be at night when the crime occurred, because most of the people died in their own houses or beds, and few dead were found on the roads in the village. The time of death was about 2 days ago. If it was daytime, the people in the village would not be so crowded at home. Some of them must have gone to the fields or went out. However, they checked the nearby fields and found no corpses or traces of murder. And if the people in the village were not killed, there is no reason for 2 days to pass and no one came to deal with it, so the biggest possibility is that the whole village, old and young, were all killed. So complete, it can only be done at night, to be more precise, it should be late at night. The other party, probably because they were worried about being discovered, did not clear the scene with fire. Instead, they carried back several corpses that had fallen not far from the entrance of the village and threw them into the house. None of the others moved. The soldiers gathered all the corpses at the entrance of the village in silence, one after the other, and they were obviously put together by a family, and they fell on the road in the village. Lighting the lamps at night, everyone searched the entire village. They even searched the cellar, and indeed there was not a single survivor. A soldier carried a child about 3 or 4 years old out of the cellar, and couldn't help crying. The child was killed by stabbing a knife into his abdomen. The soldier found several baskets of fallen vegetables on the left side of him. It was his family who hid him in the cellar, but he was still checked out. The child's grandparents, parents, and 3 uncles were all down at the gate and in the hall, but the door leading to the cellar was clean without a trace of blood. Obviously, his family didn't run to the backyard, just to prevent the murderer from noticing the cellar in the backyard, but the child who was protected by the whole family still failed to survive. Everyone lit the torches and stood silently on the large ping at the entrance of the village. Even Deputy General Joan, who was used to bullying ordinary people, couldn't help but have red eyes, and cursed, "These bastards are simply inhumane. No wonder the imperial court wants to send an army to suppress them." When everyone heard this, there was some hatred in their eyes. "Vice General Joan, let's go back and kill the bandits, and avenge the common people." Chi Heiran squatted on the ground to examine the corpse, and when he heard this, he gave him a hard look, then turned his head and said to Deputy General Joan, "Who said this was done by bandits? Who else is it if it's not bandits? Could it be the army of our imperial court?" Deputy General Joan shouted, dissatisfied with Chi Heiran's questioning tone. "There are more than 200 people in the village. There must be many people on the other side for such a large-scale massacre. I have rarely seen such a frenzied homicide. It is impossible for a few or dozens of people to do such a big case. In addition to the imperial army, there are only bandits, and this kind of insane thing was not done by bandits, so could it be that our colleagues did it?" a battalion chief yelled. The soldiers were also filled with righteous indignation when they heard the words, and some even shouted, "General, take us back to fight the bandits. We will definitely wipe out all these gangsters and return the common people to a bright future." Chi Heiran sneered, "If you want to return the common people to a bright future, you have to fight not only bandits, but also foreign enemies." Chi Heiran tore open the chest of a corpse on the ground, revealing the hideous knife wound, and said, "Do you really think that this man was killed by bandits? Don't forget, the villages we passed before were all in good condition. The bandit den is much closer." "What do you mean, General?" Vice General Zhong looked down at the wound, thinking of what Chi Heiran said just now. His face changed, and said, Is this done by a barbarian?" As soon as these words came out, everyone's expressions changed, and they looked warily at the knife wound on the chest of the corpse on the ground, as if there was a scourge there. Chi Heiran sighed and said, "It is hateful for bandits to rob houses, but it is undeniable that they used to be the people of my great Zhou. Most of them fell into the grass and became bandits, but there are many relatives and friends who still stay at the foot of the mountain as good people. Such people would you slaughter the village, even the young and old." Chi Heiran saw that everyone bowed their heads in thought, and said again, "Among you, some of you have been soldiers in Hangzhou a few years ago, and you should be no strangers to the local bandits. It can be seen that they are so cruel and crazy. Although those bandits robbed passing merchants, robbed officials, and even stormed government offices, they rarely robbed ordinary people, let alone killed people. Yes, even the Qi Shanzai, which the worst people hate, would go down the mountain to grab the food and poultry raised by the people's homes at most. Every time they plundered, they would not take away all the food. Could it be that the bandits became more ruthless as they went out, and even directly slaughtered the village? Gone. So, it's really not the bandits who did it, but the barbarians," a soldier said with a pale face. "But, aren't we on Jingnan South Road? Why are there barbarians here? The pass is not only far from here, Weijinghu is the middle of the Great Zhou, right? The soldiers looked at Chi Heiran with some uncertainty, wanting to get his support, because he told them all these things. Before, they didn't even know how many government offices there were on South Jing South Road, but Qi Shen will teach them to recognize the map in the future, but also to recognize the map of the whole Great Zhou dynasty. These little guys who had just joined the army knew that the Jing South Road where they were located was in the middle of the Great Zhou dynasty, and it was very prosperous. Could it be that Qi Heiran was wrong in his teaching, that Jinghu South Road is actually not as far from the border as they thought, and that the barbarians could slaughter their villages as soon as they came in? Qi Heiran's face sank into the water. Of course he knew how far it was from the border, and it was because of this that his face became even more ugly. Deputy General Zhong also grabbed the arm of a battalion chief with trembling hands and feet, and leaned on him with half his body strength, so he didn't fall to the ground. The next thing is not something ordinary soldiers can listen to. Qi Heiran once again told everyone clearly that Jinghu South Road is in the middle of Dazhu, and it is not close to the border. As for why the Hu people came to Jinghu to slaughter the village, and why the village was slaughtered, this remains to be investigated, but I have a vast land and abundant resources, and there are countless roads and small roads. Maybe those barbarians came from the small roads. Therefore, Qi Heiran asked everyone to think about whether there are outsiders in their hometowns when they are resting tonight. Unknown small roads can lead to traffic arteries and so on. After assigning tasks to everyone and diverting everyone's attention, Qi Heiran led a group of middle and upper-level military leaders into a house. Fei Bai asked people to stay outside, went to the kitchen to bring a pot of water and went back to add boiled water for everyone. Qi Heiran was just saying, this matter must be notified to the imperial court and all the troops as soon as possible, so that everyone should be careful to guard against barbarians. We need to send more people. Deputy General Zhong poured himself a big sip of water and asked, General, are you sure this was done by a barbarian? Maybe it was a vendetta or something. You must know that this place is so far away from the border, and the imperial court has 200,000 troops in Jingnan Lake Road. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 502. This is the most dangerous. Qi Heiran flashed an angry look on his face. Xixia's army is equipped with a kind of broadsword. I have fought against their soldiers before, and I know the inertia of wounds caused by that kind of knife. There are more than 200 people in the village. No, if there are only a few people, it can be said to be a coincidence, but more than 200 people, including children, all suffered the same kind of knife wounds, and the moves are all from the Xixia army. You tell the general, this may be a vendetta, or an accident. Lieutenant Zhong's hands trembled, and he couldn't help covering his face. He didn't want to admit this fact. If it was true, it meant that the foreign enemy had already opened the gate of their house and rushed to the second courtyard. The owner and family members who lived in the third entrance still lived as usual without knowing it. No, maybe the foreign enemies not only rushed to the second entrance, but they might even sneak into their backyard in disguise. Thinking of this, Lieutenant Zhong shuddered. Qi Heiran's heart trembled as well, but he was never a person who avoided difficulties. On the contrary, the more difficult the situation was, the stronger and calmer he was. No matter how much thought and calculation he had before, when facing the invasion of foreign enemies, any bandit suppression, military control, or even rebellion, all have to temporarily step aside. If he is left alone, what is the difference between him and the Tartars, and the royal family of the Great Zhou that he despises? At this time, nothing is more important than resisting foreign humiliation. Qi Heiran raised his eyes to look at everyone, and seeing the timidity in their eyes, he knew that they were afraid of fighting against the barbarians, and they still had illusions about this matter, so he said, the cost of Xixia knives is not low. If it is not Xixia people, then what is there in this village? It's worth it for them to do this. Besides, why did they pretend to be Xixia people? Isn't it best to blame the bandits at this time? There are so many bandits on Jinghu South Road, Even if the Yamen has doubts, can they check them one by one, or is it because the investigation failed with all their strength? Therefore, the incident happened suddenly, and the other party obviously had no time to think about it, and they couldn't even stop it. What is shown now is the most real. They dare not burn the corpses and destroy the evidence because they are afraid of attracting people from nearby villages. And they can't guarantee that they can clear all the traces, and they are in a hurry, they just want to leave the scene as soon as possible. Chi Heiran met everyone's eyes, and said word by word, "This is what the Xixia people did." In order to suppress the bandits, the Holy Lord dispatched troops from all walks of life to support them. The troops dispatched from Jingnan South Road may not only be the garrisons on the southwest and northwest main roads, but also the garrisons guarding the border. I don't know if the Xixia soldiers bypass the garrison's site, or go straight ahead. Anyway, now a Xixia army has arrived at our place. People in this village may have discovered them, or it may be that the existence of this village blocked their way, so they were massacred. Now we have 5 days. I can't get the latest news from the court. Chi Heiran couldn't go on talking about this, and sighed, "I'm all to blame for this matter. In order to avoid the pursuit of bandits, I took everyone to hide in Tibet. I can only go to ordinary people for information. After all, the information they know is limited. Now I don't know what the situation at the border is like. General, I can't blame you for this matter. We only have such a small number of people. Most of Jingnan Road is occupied by bandits. If you didn't lead us, we would have been torn apart by those bandits." Deo, and another one followed closely, "General, if you have any ideas, just say it, we all listen to you. Anyway, we knew it before we became soldiers, and it would be difficult to go back alive, and we had already picked up it before one life. This life is yours. If you can fight a barbarian before you die, it is not in vain to come to this world." "Yes, aren't they the barbarians? We did it with them." A camp manager slapped the table and shouted. 3 of the 5 battalion commanders expressed their views, and the other 2 looked at Lieutenant Zhone hesitantly, opened their mouths, but still lowered their heads and said nothing. Chi Heiran looked at Vice General Zhone, who took a deep breath, bitter in his heart, but said firmly on his face, "As long as there is definite evidence to prove that this matter was done by 11 Xia, the last general will also be dispatched by the general, and 11 Xia will not die endlessly." Chi Heiran nodded and said, "I have surveyed the traces in the village, and there should be no less than 500 of them. With so many people walking all the way from the border to here, it is impossible not to show any traces, so we just need to look carefully. Traces will definitely be found. My subordinates have also surveyed the entrance and exit, and they can barely see some traces, but they can't be seen at all farther away. Either the various traces overlap, or they have disappeared. This place is still like this, let alone time. It's been a while longer." Chi Heiran took out the map and said, "Based on the situation of this village as a reference, they should follow the big roads and the small roads, and avoid places with a lot of population. Avenue, this village is only 2 days away from Tongren. Tongren is very small, and the terrain is dangerous in some places, and there are only 2 small roads extending from this village. Send people along these 2 roads to see if they can find any traces." Chi Heiran looked at Deputy General Zhone, and said, "If the investigation finds out that this matter is really a vendetta killing as you said, or killing people for other interests or conflicts, and only targeting people in this village, I will feel sorry for the people in the village, but will still be happy, because we have avoided a disaster in Dazhu." Deputy General Zhone breathed a sigh of relief, but fortunately Chi Heiran was not stubborn. Early the next morning, Chi Heiran sent 2 teams to investigate along the 2 selected trails in order to prevent someone from intentionally fabricating or concealing evidence. Chi Heiran mixed up those who were loyal to him and those who were partial to Vice Admiral Zhone. Together, let them supervise each other. After they left, Chi Heiran asked people to dig more than 60 large pits not far from the village, planning to bury all the corpses. The weather was hot at this time, and the corpses decomposed quickly, although they had only died for 2 days, but the smell of carrion was already in the air. Chi-Heiran originally wanted to burn it clean, but seeing the family lined up together, Chi-Heiran felt that burying the family together might be the only comfort for them after death. So Chi-Heiran ordered to dig more than 60 big holes, one for each family. The people who were left alone before were identified after they found the genealogy and household registration of each family. When they buried all the people, the Deputy General Zhong, who stayed behind in the village, also took the whole village and scraped it. Everything that can be eaten and used is concentrated in dapping. Seeing that Chi-Heiran's expression was not very good, Deputy General Zhong immediately explained, "These things will rot if kept, why not support the soldiers? Besides, don't we want to find revenge for their murderers? The whole thing is considered as a reward." Chi-Heiran snorted coldly, and said, "Did you say no to it? But you gather your things here, what if it rains? It's because we don't like the moldy rice we ate these days, so we plan to make another batch." Deputy General Zhong immediately asked someone to move the food to a larger room, and put other supplies in each room separately. Chi-Heiran stood at the window and watched for a while, then turned around and sat on the chair, looking down at the small token in his hand. Fei Bai was puzzled and said, "Master, why don't you take this thing out? If you take it out, who would suspect that it wasn't done by Zixia? We still need to go to great lengths to find evidence and traces."